Perfect. Welcome, everybody. You are listening to the Startup Secrets for Entrepreneurs. I am your host, Shelby Oleschlager, and our mission here is to help entrepreneurs make a difference and navigate the messy world of startup or relaunch. Join me today where we dig deep with our guests to get you the best concepts and strategies to fast track your business. Today, we have Jeff Durso here with us, who serial entrepreneur, and I'm very excited to chat with you and get inside your brain a little bit about your business. So to get started, Jeff, first of all, welcome to the show, and also tell us a little bit about what you do.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. So like I said, I'm a serial entrepreneur. So I've been starting businesses for as long as I can remember. I graduated right into the dot-com boom, which is kind of a bizarre time to get started, and started a company in the 90s that at first we sort of met every week coming up with ideas for changing the world. And then we're like, let's just start a consulting company when you could actually do that, and built a pretty sizable consulting company, sold that in 2000. Then a few years later, started a company called destinationweddings.com, which at the time there was no big player in that space. And so we sort of, we put the flag on the hill and decided we were going to become the big player, and worked really hard. And that company ended up in the Inc. 500 after a few years, which was that's probably one of the most exciting experiences. And then since then, I've just started a bunch of different companies in all sorts of different spaces. And that's what I still do today.
Yeah, awesome. So going from more of the business side of, you're building your business now to the consulting, what have you noticed between the two different type of models, and what kind of is your preference, I guess?
I still like both, and I still do both over time. So I've actually found that they're a lot more alike than different, because in both cases you're solving challenges. And every time I've started a company, I've used the same models that I used in my consulting practice to whiteboard out the idea, to kind of put a plan for validation. So I've actually found them to be a lot more alike than different, even though at the beginning of my career I thought there were two completely different worlds.
Right. Yeah. Like, how does that transition work? Like, if you're going from consulting to something different, has your why kind of stayed the same between the two? Like, you always had the same motive when approaching starting these businesses?
Oh, that's interesting. The why can change a lot, right? When it's your money on the line, or you like, if you fail it, like you have to use credit cards to take out a loan, like in the early days. So yeah, the why definitely can become a lot more powerful. But when you're consulting, you're dealing with someone else's why too. So I think if you properly understand where they're coming from, it's the same experience, right? It's motivating them to sort of understand the frameworks to get it done. So that's why I think my insight has been that they're a lot more alike than different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. With going through these businesses, has there been any sort of surprising obstacles or challenges that you've been facing in the past, or that are facing today?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think in every business that you get to a point where you can get stuck, you can kind of hit a plateau, and you can't force there's that Einstein quote that you can't solve a problem at the level that it was created. So you kind of get mired in this place, and until you can step back and see something bigger, you're not going to get out of that problem. So I've seen time and time again through my experience where, like with my consulting company, we were at a point where we almost lost the company. We were kind of bored and we hated it. And then the next day we were like excited and reignited, like this is the best thing ever. So it's like something changed in our mind, and then everything fell into place again with the company. And I found that through a lot of my companies, where like at some plateau, or you'll hit the swamp or the wall or whatever it is, and that you have to step back and really go back to kind of, you put it, your why, to sometimes to get that. You have to like reinvigorate your why. Like, why am I doing this in the first place? You can't just bang your head against a wall and hope to get through it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Just keeping, like, I love the phrase, I'm going to paraphrase, where it's just like, the best ship in the world won't get to the destination if it doesn't really know the destination. Yeah. And I think, like that why is always kind of that North Star for us. So yeah, that's definitely really, really important. Right now you're doing more consulting, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I'm doing a mix. I run my own business, a networking platform called Blitzer, and then I'm also consulting with a bunch of different clients in terms of like larger technology companies, in terms of getting their growth to go.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about Blitzer then. That sounds
So
interesting.
yeah, so Blitzer is something we built during the pandemic. So a couple of years ago, we noticed already that like a month into the pandemic, we noticed that we were getting Zoom fatigue. We were kind of sick of being on all these Zoom calls, and like there wasn't a lot of engagement. We said, okay, is there a different way to do this? And we came up with like a speed networking concept where you go on an event and you may meet anywhere between 5 and 10 other people one-on-one for 5-minute sequential conversations. And it's just, these events are fun. So, I mean, we've run thousands of these events now over the past few years. And in addition to running the business, I actually attend a lot of these events just because it's fun. It's a fun way to like, I can log into one of these events and an hour later I've met 10 new people.
Mm-hmm. And they all relate, right? Like I'm sure they're all in a similar type of realm, or is it?
Usually it can be a mix, so they were all topical. So we have all sorts of different, so we don't run all the events ourselves. We have all sorts of people come to our platform and run their own events.
Okay.
So it's like any other, whatever group they want to do, whatever topic they want to do, then people who want to meet each other on that topic can come meet.
That's a really good idea. Just filling that void because I found as well with just, it's only Zoom. Like we only had Zoom for so long and it's like, there definitely has to be a better way. So I find
Exactly. Yeah, it's a different way. And I've reignited my I love Zoom. So I get a lot of value out of Zoom, but I think that people use Zoom too much as a solution to every problem, and it's not. So we feel a different, we're solving a different problem where I think that kind of connection or engagement, you can do a lot better on Blitzer than you can on Zoom.
Yeah, it's more like real life. Like if you're actually to go to a meetup or something, it's
exactly.
You feel
Exactly.
Very, very cool. So then your consulting business, tell us a little bit about that, of kind of like what your perfect avatars look like or your ideal client is for the consulting side.
Yeah. So I think the way I would describe it is, and I've seen this with a lot of companies and I've experienced it myself. Like, when you're starting a company, you're starting in the garage or on a whiteboard and it's fun and it's just this idea and you're not in that swamp. And eventually, even if you succeed, suddenly the company's very different, right? Now you're operating a company. And if you're operating a successful company, you have a cash cow and that's great. But you're still in the back of your mind, you miss the days of being a startup, right? You're like, oh, like this isn't as fun. It's like, now I'm managing a lot of people. I'm not starting. I'm not like chasing my dreams. And also that's sort of from the personal thing. I think from a business perspective, a lot of people recognize that Google became Google because of the 20% time that they gave their employees, or anyone could work on anything they wanted for 20% of their time. And that launched Gmail, that launched Maps, that launched all these different things where people could just do whatever they want. So what I like to do is take these founders who've gotten to a point where their company's hitting that plateau, or just hitting some kind of mental plateau at say $1 million a year, 2 million a year, 5 million a year, 10 million a year, whatever, where I help bring them back into the garage is what I do. I help give them someone to work with who can help them figure out what that next innovation or that next breakthrough is going to be. And that's always been my sweet spot, because that's what I can connect with them on, is like, you've got your whole business here and keep running it, but let's talk about the next thing. What other innovations are you going to do? What's your 20% time as the founder of a now successful business? Because you should have that too. If everything you're doing is just running the cash cow, you're going to run the risk of any other business where some other upstart in their garage is going to take you out. So does that, I know I'm kind of talking ethereal a little bit, but that's kind of that's what I do my best work, is when I connect with founders who like want to get that passion back and like want to test new ideas and do innovation.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And like the idea of putting them back in the garage, because I guess, just life and business takes away on them. And all of a sudden they're just working for, you said, like the cash cow, where they're not getting that innovative brain moving, like you said with Google, which I didn't know that about Google. That's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, because Google was just a search company.
Yeah.
And so why did they create Gmail? Gmail was one employee just started working on, he's like, I want to create an email thing. Like employees could do whatever they wanted for 20% of their time. And I think the payoff of that has been massive. But I think it's really critical for any startup founder as their company grows, not just from a fun perspective, because if they want to have fun, they have to be doing crazy things. They can't just be managing the business all the time. But also from a business perspective, if they want to innovate, they have to be able to do stuff that's not on the critical burning priority needs of feeding their cash cow.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. With doing all this, has there been any sort of like, obviously it sounds like your clients are very specific and you're looking for a specific type of individual. Is there a lot of them around that want to go back to the garage that
Yeah, I
feel
mean, yeah, a lot of them, they when you get them one-on-one, they'll tell you that they're not telling their board this, they're not telling their
yeah.
employees this, they're not, this isn't something that they're sharing far and wide necessarily. But when you they do have a charter to innovate. And so, but really what they mean by that is they want to go back into the garage. They want to
Yeah.
have that fun again. So I've found a lot more than you'd imagine, like around. So like, for instance, I'm in the Boston there's a lot of startups and growing tech companies in Boston. So I found quite a few companies in Boston that can relate to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. That's cool because yeah, you're kind of like letting them take the guard down a little bit. It's like, it's okay. Like we can, like we can backtrack. You still have these titles, but we can, almost like go a bit smaller and get bigger with that and bigger with the vision. So it's
And you
very,
have to, and you really don't. I mean, they know they really don't have a choice. Like they're afraid of that. If they lose their innovative edge, like I said, then some upstart's gonna threaten them.
mm-hmm. Yeah. So with that all being said, is there something when you were starting or where you are now, is there anything that you know now that you wish you knew sooner?
Interesting. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's that it's okay to have all these crazy ideas and like to think like that. That's there's nothing. I always assumed that I was going to mature over the course of my career, and in terms of like not having these kind of like childlike thoughts about ideas, or just looking at a business and trying to find the like, what are the little fun things about there, what are the crazy ideas. And I would say keep being crazy is what I would say. Don't lose that, because anytime I've tried to suppress that or just totally professionalize myself,
Mm-hmm.
I've lost that spark. So I think the key would be is fan the flame. Don't ignore it. Don't try to suppress it.
Mm-hmm.
Don't just try to grow up.
Yeah, I love that. I totally relate to that because it's, yeah, you have all these visions and you're like, oh, maybe I should like tone it down a little bit or whatnot. But it's
Yep.
kind of like yourself speaking out of, what your true passions are. And I
Yeah,
definitely,
and I mean I could tell you a story, but I mean like when we sold my first company, and I was like I was up and to the right, like so I was put on as like a director. So I went from like being the CTO slash developer slash sales guy, so like all these things for my startup, to suddenly like I was managing a team of 20 developers, but I wasn't developing any code myself. And like
mm-hmm.
doing that, I was like, I felt so out of touch. I was like, wow, I'm not actually experimenting with the things that I like to experiment. And then when I went and started another company after that, I started from scratch and did all the programming myself, just did everything myself again, and reignited it. I'm like, oh, this is fun. So like, don't elevate yourself too far from the problem, or you lose touch with it.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you just kind of talked a little bit about, like planning ahead and the dreaming big and stuff. So with that being said, what does your next year look like? Like, where would you like your businesses to go?
So I think what I'm going to be doing over the next year, I'm actually going to be launching a podcast in the next few months, because I've sort of realized that I've had a lot of ideas and I have a lot of conversation with people and I share a lot of stories and insights and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, I want to formalize that into a platform. So that's what I sort of had this insight a couple of months ago, where I'm like, okay, it's time for me to formalize my platform and build a podcast, and then use that as the centerpiece of all of my businesses. So my businesses will change over the years. My clients will change. My startups that I launch myself will change. But I want to create a platform that's my home, that I can execute, and that's going to start as a podcast.
Yeah, cool. So will that be under your own name, kind of, or?
So I'm still playing with different. It's right now the working title is the founder breakthroughs.
Ah,
So it'll be my podcast, but that'll be the title. It'll be founder breakthroughs. So I'll be interviewing companies that have had major breakthroughs, and get a deep dive behind the story to figure out like what challenges did they have, how did they face those challenges, what insights can we gather from that, and then
yeah.
also it'll be used to share some of my crazy ideas that I've had experimentally, in terms of like, hey, I'm seeing this in the world. Does anyone else see this? What do you guys think?
Mm-hmm.
So kind of a combination of those two things. It's not going to be. I don't want it to be like a crusty like, here's me pontificating to the world. It's going to be me interviewing people and really kicking around ideas, and then
Mm-hmm.
getting feedback from them.
Yeah. And also like the goal is obviously like your clients are going to be listening to the podcast and learning more about you as it goes and just building that authority. So definitely very important as far
Yeah,
as.
and I think beyond authority too. I think for me, it's curiosity. So curiosity is how I build authority,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense. Like, because like I said, every time I've drawn the conclusion that I've arrived is when bad stuff starts happening. And every time I remind myself that I'm still a beginner on the next phase of the journey, then really good things happen, like really amazing things happen. Right. So like I said, when I had sold my first company, I was like, well, I had arrived, I was only like 27. I had sold this company. I was driving my dream car. I'm like, this is awesome. And then like I stagnated, like, okay. And like I said, I had this big team and I wasn't doing fun stuff. And then I went back to the drawing board and built destinationweddings.com and got under the Inc. 500. I'm like, that's awesome. And then again, I let that go to my head a little bit and stack. So I'm like, okay, every time I feel like I've arrived or feel like I'm an authority, then I stop, I lose my edge. Whereas if I'm just like, like to me, it's like, I'm the same like 9-year-old that loved using a computer and like loved exploring new stuff. Anytime I tap into that, magic happens. And so to me, my platform is not about building authority. It's about promoting curiosity and bringing other people along for that journey. And if that translates to authority, that's great.
Yeah. And I even think just in that sense, it almost is like an authority thing to be like, be more curious. And if you're using yourself as that example, people, I think naturally will just resonate to that anyways, naturally.
Yeah. I think we all experience this, right? When we have success and we get too high on our success and we suddenly realize we have all the answers, that's when we set ourselves up for failure. So it's like, and again, this goes back to like what you'd asked about, like, what do I work with my clients? Well, I'm working with successful clients that have high growth companies, right? What's their biggest risk is like having blinders on and becoming stagnant, right? So I help break that for them. So it's that to me is like, it's like just being curious, exploring new ideas, looking for fun stuff to jam together, trying to discover, chocolate and peanut butter, like just doing that. That to me is what's fun. And that's going to get me to want to do this podcast, not coming out and saying, I have the answer and here it is, and I'm going to jam it down your throat.
Right. Because in that sense, that's almost the way that you're saying that you're done. It's like, here's all the answers. I'm done giving the answer and that's it.
And I've been there a bunch of times where I was convinced I had all the answers. And that is when you're just set up to get smacked by the universe. And so it's like, okay, there's no need to go through that process. You can just stay curious.
Yeah. The universe does a good job of humbling us, I think.
It does. every single time. And no matter how far, as soon as you think you've arrived, it's like, watch out.
Yeah. Do you find that with some of the people that you're working with that they kind of struggle with that acceptance of being okay not knowing?
I think they fear it. I think they secretly fear it, and they're glad to be able to express it because it's hard for them. You can't say that to your board, right? You can't say it's like, you have to express to your board, like, oh, I'm confident everything's going great and we're moving forward. But you need someone to, as CEO of one of these companies, you need someone to talk to who can be like, you can tell me like what you're, hey, you're curious about this other thing over here. Well, let's explore it. Why not?
Yeah. Do a lot of your clients, are they online or is it in-person consulting?
It's a mix. So, I mean, obviously pre-pandemic, it was a lot more in person. Now it's moving a lot more online, where it's both in terms of necessity and in terms of like, well, opportunity. I can talk to, now I've realized I can do this online too. I can have clients all over the place. So
yeah. Do you have a preference? Like, do you mind the online aspect of it?
No, I actually enjoy both now too. And again, that was something, the pandemic was something that you kind of learned, that we kind of got, I heard a VC describe this and I thought it was early on in the pandemic that, she opened up to me. It was interesting. She's like, it was a real one step backwards when the pandemic happened. Cause like, now we can't do our demo days. And like, what the heck are we supposed to do? And then she was like, well, then suddenly I could do demo days in every city instead of just one city, because we had to do them virtually anyways. And so it was like one step backwards and suddenly 2 steps forward. And so the pandemic forced us to experiment with some virtual things and realizing that some of them work okay. So exactly. I think for me, I'm excited about the virtual side of it now.
Yeah. And also just as like in a marketing aspect, it's a lot easier to potentially to get those exact audiences that we want, and got to be so thankful for technology now to really help us and guide us in that way.
Exactly. Yeah. Cause it doesn't matter. You can talk with anyone around the world now.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, like kind of show them what you can do and what you can offer. And again, with the podcast, I think that's awesome because people listening, they might be like, I need help with this. And then they reach out, and before you know it, you're growing your consulting business and trying to grow that. So I'm a little curious just with the consulting aspect, because I think that's such a very unique area of what you're doing with these business owners. How many people do you have, and like, how do you want to expand the consulting? Like, do you want to make it your main focus? And what does that look like?
In terms of how many clients do I have, or?
Yeah.
So usually I only keep a handful at any given time. So I try not to go, I would say I like to keep that as about half my focus. I don't want it to be more than half my focus, because I always have running my own startups or doing other experimental stuff. So, I always love talking to more potential clients in that area, because I love learning about different businesses. But my goal is to keep that to a handful.
Yeah. And is it, because I find like the more specific sometimes we go, the harder it is to find these people. Do you find that difficult to get yourself positioned in that? And
sometimes like I have a specific idea, but then it will be something completely different than that. And that's okay. Like what I say will resonate with someone who's not in what I thought was my quote unquote avatar, but that's okay. Right. So it's like, I would have never imagined that I was going to be CEO of a company called Destination Wedding Travel when I didn't know anything about any of those three things. But that was an opportunity that I fell into. I met a travel company that wanted to pursue this niche, and I realized, hey, I can build this. I can figure this out. So I think it would be very dangerous for me to be too specific about who I want to work with, if that makes sense, because there's no way I would have ever picked that. And yet that was the largest company that I've built so far. Yeah,
it's true. You never really know the direction it's going to go. But I mean, if you have the right intention and you can solve these issues or solve these problems and do something that you don't know where it's going to lead, which is kind of the beauty of it all.
Yeah. And I think that's so for me, where I gravitate towards is, I jokingly say that I don't know anything, but I know everything else. So it's like, I love meeting experts. Like in that case, like these guys, this travel company, were just phenomenal. Like they had a really well-oiled machine operation for delivering travel. And they knew wedding expert, they had some wedding expertise too. And I could help bring my consulting toolkit, like you had said before, to map out what would a mega brand in the space look like? What would that customer service be? What would the opportunity, what would the offering be? It's kind of like when Airbnb defined, like, what would that look like? That's kind of the exercise we went through with that. And so I love finding people who are very deep specialists. You know how they'll tell everyone, hey, you should be a specialist. It's like, well, hey, I'm a generalist, and have no shame at, like, I'm gonna be a generalist forever, and I'm proud of it. And that's sue me, but because I know everyone's like, oh, you need to be a specialist. I love specialists because of that. I feed off that energy. Because I'm a generalist, I can come in, I can meet a specialist, a subject matter expert. I can put all the infrastructure around to just skyrocket them up to the next level. And that's because I've remained as a generalist. I've resisted the temptation to quote unquote specialize throughout my career.
Yeah. And they always say it's like, oh, you really need to niche down, like be super, super specific.
That's exactly. I don't.
Yeah.
I don't. And I purposely don't. And I've heard though, like, well, do you want, who makes more, a cardiac surgeon or a general? It's like, I get that. Okay. I've heard that, but who makes the most is the generalist who figures it out. Like, it's for everybody. It's a freaking tough. It's a lot harder. It doesn't pay well in the middle, but if you can figure out how to get it all the way across the line, that's where the amazing things happen. And so for me, I've always tried to stay general to some level and then look for specialists who are doing something interesting that I can connect with, and where I can help them take that energy up to the next level.
Yeah. And just the idea of like, it made me think of do what you're good at, where if these specialists are very good at being a specialist in that field, they need someone like you that is that generalist that's going to help them with that broader sense where they can really focus on what they're good at. And I think
exactly. So I can help give a strategic context. So I can take their specialty and then blow it up. Like, so, I took a travel agency that was just a regional travel agency and we turned it into a $50 million massive travel company.
Yeah.
So because of that whole building that whole experience. So like that to me, that's a lot of fun for me, is looking at a specialist. Because the problem with specialists is you can get too stuck on like a certain thing. And so what I can do is help them see the bigger picture and put a strategy for how to get to that bigger picture. Yeah. And that's the most fun for me.
Yeah. And it actually makes a lot of sense. Like now that I'm hearing this, I'm like, I feel like I need something like that. Like, cause like you're stuck in your little lane and then you need that person to maybe be like, hey, like there's a lot more out here that we can do.
Yeah. And you said, well, it's why is the motivator, right? Well, that's help giving these people a bigger why. Because it can be easier if you're that specialist. It can be easier to get stuck in that plateau. It's like, well, what's the big picture for me? Yeah. Help them discover a big picture.
Yeah. I was going to kind of wrap this up with just asking if you did have one final piece of advice for people. I feel like it's the why, but do you have anything that you would share to everybody that you'd like them all to know?
Yeah. So it's something that I would say that I think a lot of the world is really focused on optimizing everything and hacks and like do this and make everything more efficient, take the friction out of it. I mean, that's all good stuff. But I think sometimes, and I call that resistance, right? I think sometimes you need to focus on the other side of the equation, which I call voltage, which is like building up your why, building the excitement. Like if you optimize all of the efficiency out of your business, but you're your why is puny, you're not going to have any success. But if you build that why and make it huge, you can crush through any sort of resistance that gets in your way. So just reminding people that don't just focus on optimizing and removing resistance, also focus on building your why up, building your vision. Every breakthrough I've had where I told you where like my company, we almost gave up on my first company. And then the next day we were excited. That was all mindset. That was all changing our perspective on the why. I think people need to do a lot more of that.
Yeah. And they need to find you. So with that being said, for people listening that feel like they resonate with your messages and would like to learn more, where can they find you?
So the best place to find me is on the Founder Breakthroughs podcast, which is founderbreakthroughs.com, which will be launching in the next month. So by the end of June.
That's exciting. Cool. Yeah. Hopefully everyone listening, they'll go check out Jeff and his podcast and his business.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much. It was great speaking with you.
Yeah, you as well.